Hello and welcome. You're with us here on Business Today. I'm Abha Bakaya. Here are the headlines tonight. Sensex snaps two-day losing run, jumps over 850 points as market rebounds. Nifty back above 17,150. Auto, financials, metals shine. Business Today TV exclusive, government planning 8,425 crore rupee viability gap funding scheme for fertilizer plants. Scheme to produce urea from green hydrogen. Another big Business Today TV exclusive, former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan discusses the biggest challenges for the Indian economy and farm laws in an exclusive conversation. Anger and frustration as Indian origin CEO in US fires 900 employees over a brutal Zoom call weeks after his company raised $750 million in funding. And will brand Victrina follow the path of Virushka to rule the advertising world? A special report by Business Today TV. The bulls back in action in trade today. The banking shares witnessed buying interest ahead of the monetary policy meeting outcome. Metal, auto shares also are locked up decent gains. The Nifty Bank Index closed the days up 2.47% or 882 points. The Nifty 50 index settling with gains of 265 points at 17,177, while Sensex snapped its two-day losing run, jumping over 850 points as market rebounded. The broader markets also finished higher following the benchmarks. Top gainers today, Hindalco up over 5%, Tata Steel up 4%, Axis Bank up 3.6%, ICICI Bank up 3.5% and Tata Motors up 3.2%. Some of the laggards, Britannia, Cipla, Divi's Labs, Asian Paints, IOC. The S&P BSE Mid Cap and Small Cap Index closed up 1.3% and 1.1% respectively. Shares of Indigo soared in trade today. The stock was up 5% after Interglobe Aviation scheduled an EGM on December 30th. The EGM has been called in an effort to remove restrictions on the transfer of promoter shares. The aim is to repeal a clause in the company's Articles of Association which gives them the right of first refusal over the acquisition of each other's shares. The move will allow either side to sell or transfer shares to a third entity without giving each other notice. RBI will present its fourth bi-monthly monetary policy tomorrow. The central bank is expected to keep repo rate unchanged, keeping implications of the Omicron variant in view, and may hike reverse repo rate, the rate at which the RBI borrows from banks. The reverse repo has come into focus as the RBI has indicated that it will start normalizing liquidity in December, even while retaining an accommodative stance. This is seen by some as pointer to a reverse repo rate hike from the present level of 3.35%. Even as Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a fertilizer plant in Gorakhpur today, the central government is planning a massive fund infusion for two new fertilizer factories. Business Today TV has learned that the centre is planning an 8,425 crore rupee viability gap funding scheme to boost domestic manufacturing and reducing the import of urea, DAP and ammonia. Let's bring Chetan Bhatani on for more details on this. Chetan, take us through what's being planned.
Well, Abha, to reduce India's import bill, the Government of India is planning a 8,425 crore viability gap funding scheme for import substitution of fertilizers that is on the cards currently. My sources are telling me that the government's draft national hydrogen mission has proposed to cover two green urea plants of about 1.3 million metric ton per annum capacity for fertilizer production from green hydrogen. Remember, green hydrogen is hydrogen produced from renewable energy sources. In fact, in the initial stages, the government will support the cost difference between the domestically made green hydrogen-based fertilizers and benchmark price of imported fertilizers through the viability gap funding. In fact, in 2019, we remember India imported about 10 million metric tons of urea, 5 million metric tons of DAP and 3 million metric tons of ammonia worth about $6 billion. So definitely to cut down on the import bills for fertilizer sector, India is planning such a scheme in the coming times. It could be a game changer for the fertilizer sector.
All right, big changes coming in there in that sector. Chetan, thanks so much for bringing us that story. It was a termination call from hell for hundreds of employees. The CEO of a US-based mortgage company, Bettercom, fired more than 900 employees over a brutal Zoom call. Why does this interest us? The CEO is of Indian origin.
It's been a really, really challenging decision to make. This is the second time in my career I'm doing this, and I do not want to do this. The last time I did it, I cried. This time I hope to be stronger. But we are laying off about 15% of the company.
The webinar lasted just 3 minutes, but by the end of those 180 seconds, 900 persons had lost their jobs. Employees of home loan provider Bettercom across the US and India had been fired by the company's CEO Vishal Garg. His argument? The fired employees were so lazy that they effectively stole customers from the company. The terminations, which amount to 15% of the company's workforce, comes just ahead of the Christmas holidays, usually a time of good cheer in the US.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group being laid off. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
Interestingly, Vishal Garg is a controversial figure, having been involved in altercations with his ex-partner, who he threatened he would staple against a wall and burn alive. He had been accused by his partner of manipulating financial documents and creating multiple shell companies. This comes at a time when Indians across the world have been basking in the glow of Parag Agrawal being appointed the CEO of Twitter, of the fact that Indians are ruling tech boardrooms worldwide.
Thank you for each and every one of your individual contributions to Better.
People online have been sharing this video on social media platforms, with many slamming the founder CEO of Bettercom for his actions. Interestingly, the SoftBank-backed mortgage lender announced in May it was going public, and last week received $750 million in cash as part of the deal. The company is now valued at $7.7 billion, making it ironic that the cash-rich company had to fire so many of its employees. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
Let's also go across to brand expert Harish Bijoor, now joining us to discuss some of the implications, the fallout of this massive firing. Harish, thanks so much for being with us. On one hand, you have the Indian community high on the successes of the likes of Parag Agrawal. On the other hand, you have this CEO from hell. How does this affect the image of the Indian global CEO?
Okay, I think what has happened is a very, very sad thing to have happened, and I think it had lacked sensitivity because, if 15% of the organization is being sacked and 900 of them on a Zoom call, that's as insensitive as it comes. But it has made news. The point I'd like to make is that if we tend to own a person of Indian origin to be a CEO who's a success out there in the United States of America, the latest example was the Twitter CEO, I think we should own even, negatives. So I think it's sad. But at the end of the day, I don't think, a CEO has a nationality. To an extent, it's business. And most of the time, it's business as usual.
Harish, what are the lessons in this for Indian startups who face uncertainty and ups and downs in business?
Well, uncertainty is the cornerstone on which every business is built. In fact, Indians have gone through the dot-com bust many times around, twice thus far. So I do believe one needs to be prepared. When you work within a startup culture, there is joy at times and there is sorrow at times. But the sad part of it is that 9.9 times of it out of 10, it is sorrow. So I do believe if one does work in environments such as this, one needs to be prepared. Working within new organizations is always a gamble, and I do believe when the gamble pays off, nobody complains, but when it doesn't, everybody is crying.
Absolutely. Harish, thanks so much for joining us and taking us through your perspective on one of the big headlines in the business world this evening.
Thank you.
One is a celebrated actress, the other is a favorite newcomer. She's 5 years older than him, but age is no bar for the new power couple of Bollywood, Katrina Kaif and Vicky Kaushal. Their union, being celebrated by film aficionados, is also set to create a super brand, Victrina.
Theirs is the ultimate filmy jodi. both high flyers who climbed the ladder of success with their own grit, and both set to be the next power couple in the film industry. The veteran here is Katrina. She received her first modelling assignment when she was as young as 14 and later pursued a career as a fashion model. She made her Bollywood debut with Boom in 2003, and now having worked in over 40 films, she's a brand in her own right. She earns about 11 crore rupees per movie, around 2 crore for brand endorsements, and her current net worth stands at approximately 224 crore rupees. As for Vicky Kaushal, he made his Bollywood debut in 2015 with Masan. How is the judge? Hi, sir! How is the judge? Hi, sir! But received critical and commercial acclaim for Uri, the Surgical Strike. He reportedly charges 3 to 4 crore per film, under a crore for brand endorsement, and has a net worth of around 25 crore, about 11% of his to-be wife. But it's the two which could change the fortunes for them. They joined the club of super couples with the likes of Virat Kohli and Anushka Sharma, Saif Ali Khan and Kareena Kapoor, Ranveer Singh and Deepika Padukone, all mega brands. Experts say, in case of Victrina, the power of the two could increase their endorsement rates to 3 to 5 crore rupees per campaign. This, however, will still be lower than the 5 to 7 crore rupees brand Virushka charges for its appearance in ads. Analysts attribute this higher rate to the decidedly more lucrative combination of Bollywood and cricket, which for markets and advertisers is the best mix for the Indian audience. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
Yet another SUV in the market, with Volkswagen launching the all-new Tiguan. The SUV, powered by a 2-litre petrol engine with a power output of 190 HP, has been priced at 32 lakh rupees. It will be available next month. Interestingly, there are not too many cars or SUVs in this range, with most available options either much cheaper or more expensive. The only other vehicle the Tiguan is in direct competition with is the Citroën Aircross C5. However, there is a small overlap with the Hyundai Tucson and the MG Gloster as well. Listen in to the brand director at Volkswagen, Ashish Gupta, some of the key features of the new Tiguan.
The Tiguan is a true Volkswagen in every manner. With an enviable performance and progressive design, the Tiguan makes an all-round impression. It is versatile and hosts a range of driver assist and infotainment systems on board, making this SUVW capable of handling every motoring situation with aplomb. It gives me immense pleasure to launch the refined, updated, comfortable and connected exciting new Tiguan that is redefining what's possible.
After a sharp and sudden plunge over the weekend, Bitcoin now back above $50,000. A sell-off over the weekend was the biggest since May 19. On Saturday, the crash was led by a combination of profit-taking and macroeconomic concerns. Sell-offs in many areas of the US stock market also led to the crash. Since then, Bitcoin has firmly risen in line with equity markets. As per analysts, the market sentiment is back as Omicron's effect looks milder than was earlier thought to be. Former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan discusses the biggest challenges for the Indian economy and farm laws in an exclusive conversation with Rajdeep Sardesai. Listen in.
Is your sense that the worst is over? That perhaps we will see a steady economic recovery, even allowing for these variants, assuming that they are not as deadly as the previous ones?
I think given that assumption, we are on the way out. That you know, we are learning to live with the virus, and we are learning how to manage our economies in this process. And of course, the amount of pent-up demand is going to take us still a little further. Now, of course, there's the other disease which we are facing, which is the excess, which results in inflation. You can see higher transportation costs are now showing their way into higher prices. You can see labor very tight in many industrial countries showing up in higher wages, higher inflation. And of course, inflation doesn't stay restricted to one part of the world, it spreads more widely. So the problem we are seeing now is perhaps excess demand relative to supply, which is resulting in higher inflation. Number of emerging markets, central banks have already started tightening. And so what that does is constrain the amount of space down the line.
If you were Reserve Bank of India governor still, you'd be conscious of inflation.
I would certainly,
as your major challenge at the moment.
I think it's always tempered with what the growth situation is, right? You have to think about whether there's enough supply capacity in the economy so that you can survive this level of demand without inflation going through the roof. I think in India we are seeing a rebounding economy. The question that the Reserve Bank will have to address, of course, is this rebound so strong that it's exceeding our supply capacity? The fact that inflation is still quite strong suggests that that question is not an irrelevant question.
Let's look at the Indian economy for a moment, because there's a general belief, at least India's economy managers say, we've come out of the pandemic, or hopefully the tail end of the pandemic, a little stronger than other countries. Last quarter, a growth rate 8.4, before that 20%, suggesting, they say, a V-shaped recovery. Do you see it as a V-shape, or do you see it, as you earlier told me, India versus Bharat conflict? Two countries in a way, one struggling to come out of the pandemic, the other moving ahead and seizing opportunity.
Well, both can be true at the aggregate level. Now, V-shaped is not anything to crow about. Create a bad enough downturn and the recovery will always be V-shaped. I think what is important is, have we sort of come out of the earlier malaise, and are we going to reach back to our trend level of growth? Now, to some extent, we are back to where we were in 2019. A number of countries are there, so we're not the only country that's back. But we also were a reasonably fast-growing country. 5%, 6% was what we were growing. Now, we haven't done that over the last 2 years. So effectively, we've just made up the ground that we lost in going down, but we haven't made up the ground we lost because we were already growing at a fast pace.
Sure.
And that growth has to be made up still. And that will still take some time to make up. So before we start growing, we have to say, look, are we at a reasonable place to grow further? And I think we are. We are. But we have to do a lot of things to try and get the growth that India truly deserves. Where we should be growing is 8, 9%, right? That's what's necessary to create the jobs for all the young people coming out. You know, we had this population dividend. That population dividend becomes a dividend only if those young people can get jobs. So the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we multiply the number of jobs? And is it only through, some kind of focus on manufacturing? Or can we emphasize the areas of the economy which have always done well for us, services? We've got a fantastic IT sector, which is benefiting from the global boom. Today, it's very, very hard to find people in the IT sector because, that's where employment is. You talked about two Indias. India is the IT sector.
Sure.
Bharat is in the villages. Bharat is in traditional manufacturing, where we still are not investing too much because demand is still low. What we need to do is pump up India, but also find ways to support Bharat in a much more effective way.
Do you believe that the farm reforms were actually a step in the right direction, and the government should have stuck to its guns?
No, look, I think there are elements in those farm laws which I think many people would agree to. The point is, the package as a whole had some problems. The greater problem is that different states, different regions in India require different parts of the package. And there's a lot of differentiation across the regions. Some regions, for example, don't have strong agricultural markets. Others have well-functioning agricultural markets. So the one-size-fits-all doesn't really apply. And part of the sort of reason for pushback is the attempt to put a one-size-fits-all framework on India. We need to have a framework which is much more sensitive to the different demands of different regions. Now, that said, I think we do recognize, and I think farmers also recognize, that you can't continue producing rice and wheat in such quantities, especially rice in some of the most water-starved areas of the country. So we need to have a more sensible policy which shifts production to some other crops which are more needed. But right now, farmers are doing what is most remunerative and what is most supported. So we have to find ways to shift this. But this has to be done in a sensitive way, in a way that assures them that the incomes will not disappear overnight. I think what the centre's job is to give an overlying framework within which there can be a lot of decentralization. It's not the centre's role to micromanage what happens everywhere and to say this will be the laws.
The Reserve Bank of India governor, one of your successors, has come up and said very clearly that he seems very, very skeptical about cryptocurrency and worried about cryptocurrency. What's your sense?
Well, I think the technologies behind cryptocurrency are certainly very interesting and will, over time, be more widely used. For example, blockchain, decentralized ledgers, which are really what blockchains are. Some of this new fintech trying to sort of gather information together could solve some of the problems that we're talking about. So MSMEs, for example. What is the true value of cryptocurrency other than making payments? Right now, it's very hard to see that. Even for payments, it is relatively, there are many other competing ways to make payments. In India, you can make payments through UPI. So it's hard to see a huge magnitude of value associated with more than a few cryptocurrencies. I have no doubt a few of them, Ether, etc., might survive. But there are 6,000 cryptocurrencies. Will all of them survive? Probably not. And this is where the regulator gets worried. Supposing I say this is fine to invest in, and 98% of these go bust, then I'm sort of, as a regulator, I've just put my chapa on them, and people have lost money. So, you're damned if you regulate and say they're okay, but if you don't regulate them, it becomes the Wild West, right? People raising money from the public without any questions being asked, without any sense that this is a reasonable scheme and unreasonable scheme. So, in a sense, you're caught between a rock and a hard place as a regulator. If you regulate it, people run to invest more, and that's a problem. If you don't regulate it, it becomes the Wild West, and people invest in it and say, you should have been regulating when they lose money.
That's where we leave it on the show today. Thanks so much for watching.